Welcome back to the preview show, everybody. Ian O'Neill, Harry Powell, back in your lives for UFC Apex card in Las Vegas. Paul Craig versus Brendan Allen in the middleweight division. We're going to talk about that fight. We're going to talk a little bit about Jake Matthews, Michael Morales, Jordan Leavitt versus Chase Hooper, Amanda Ribas versus Luana Pinheiro. And give a quick mention. Obviously, Mick Parkin going in there against Machado as well. We'll kind of give a mention to that as well. A little bit of a come down from the New York card, a little bit here, back to the Apex here, but a couple of interesting fights spread across this one, Harry. And we're going to get into them as this podcast progresses over the next 30 minutes or so. Let's talk about the main event first. Brendan Allen versus Paul Craig. Obviously, Paul Craig's second fight down at middleweight in the UFC division. And coming in against the Brendan Allen here in quite a little bit of form himself lately. 6 wins in a row. A good win over Bruno Silva in his last fight. Took him out by first round rear naked choke. And Brendan Allen isn't going out there and just simply winning fights. He's going out there and finishing fights as well. I did mention 6 in a row. It's actually 5 in a row. One of those was a grappling contest. But out of those 5 wins, 4 by way of finish. 1 unanimous decision win over Jacob Malkoun. And coming in here against the always durable Paul Craig, and who's on a good run as well. Obviously, good win over Andrew Muniz on his middleweight debut inside the UFC, and that win goes a long way. Gets you a crack at Brendan Allen in the main event. And it should be an interesting fight, an interesting stylistic matchup here. Two guys who like to use their grappling, and I'm looking forward to seeing this one for what it is. Is it? I do feel about this main event, it's an awful shame that they're not giving Paul Craig the opportunity to have this headliner in Scotland. I know Glasgow have been crying out for an event. And I mean, I was almost going to say there, Harry, this is not really, it's not really an exciting main event, but it's not really an exciting main event because it's in the Apex. I mean, it feels like imagine a wild Scottish crowd that are being built up to this fight. A good win for Paul Craig here inserts himself, in legit title kind of conversation at the very least in the middleweight division. But, it's kind of a one that might go under the radar a little bit with it being in the Apex in front of a couple of 10 or 100 people or something like that. I don't know. What do you feel about all of that situation?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the Apex cards are shite, right? We know what they are. They're money-saving ventures. The Apex is there. It's built. It's dressed. Everything's ready to go. It costs next to nothing to put a show on there. And so when you have cards like this, who, there are some names that we know, right? We know Paul Hughes. Fucking hell, yeah. Get Paul Hughes in there. Paul Craig versus Brendan Allen. We know them both. Jake Matthews, we know. Michael Morales, good prospect. Jordan Leavitt, Chase Hooper. We know both of those fighters. The next fight is a random one to be placed where it is, but Ribas versus Pinheiro, good fight. Medic Parsons, again, it's a fight. We know the people that are competing, right? But I agree with you that, look, I mean, maybe if Paul Craig's, Jesus Christ,
Hughes, yeah,
slips there, lads. If Paul Craig goes out and wins this, then he really, really gets, I think, an ability to call for a Glasgow show, maybe a co-main event. Maybe a number one contenders fight or something like that. But yeah, look, I mean, for the fight itself, Paul Craig has made a career off sort of beating slightly more athletic guys that hit a bit harder, but has always sort of given up a bit of size, always given up speed for sure. And he certainly will be giving up speed to Brendan Allen. But the grappling styles, I think, are very different. Brendan Allen's a very explosive grappler, somebody that hunts for submissions and hunts for them quite aggressively, is happy to scramble, happy to give up positions in order to land damage because he's confident in his ability to win scrambles. Paul Craig is kind of the opposite to that, right? Tries to land thudding shots when he does land, quite rudimentary on the feet, has improved, but certainly is by no means a striker. And then when he gets to the ground, it's just like a snake, right? Very, very slow, very concentric, very, very, very strong grips, very strong squeezes, and manages to finish fellas very, very, very quickly. So I'm certainly interested to see the grappling elements are from both of these guys, because I think if it just stays a straight striking battle, I do think it favors Brendan Allen quite heavily. But we've also seen Brendan Allen make some fucking horrific mistakes and manage to battle his way through them. I don't think you want to do that against Paul Craig,
No, you definitely don't. Do you think that I know what you're probably hoping to see? I think you're probably going to be hoping as a BJJ enthusiast, you want to see some scrambles, you want to see some action on the ground. But you have mentioned if it does play out on the feet, and what we have seen in the past between two great grapplers that will just nullify each other's takedowns and everything like that, where we could see a striking matchup here in the main event. And you do liken or you do favor Brendan Allen for that if it was the case. Why do you feel that way?
I think that he hits harder. I think
Hard,
he's deeper, and I think he can get in and out of those pockets far, far quicker. Paul Craig certainly has a long range, right? Really long legs, quite long arms. And so if he's able to get a jab working and he's able to stick behind that jab and build things off of the jab, then sure, he can be successful without a shadow of a doubt. But I also feel like Paul Craig, we've seen, gets hit, gets clipped, and is happy to go down and sort of entertain people in his guard and these sorts of things. If I'm Brendan Allen, I probably just clip him, put him down, and then force him to stand back up.
Yeah, you don't want to follow him down there. Yeah,
No, you don't. And I think Paul Craig is probably going to, if the fight stays on the feet, it's 5 rounds, right? So he's going to probably be forced to shoot at some point. And then we get to see some interesting things regardless. But I'd like to see both of them make this an MMA fight, because if I'm Brendan Allen, you might as well test yourself there. If you're confident in your scrambles, if you're confident in your ability to force these scrambles, maybe don't enter a closed guard or anything silly like this, but play about in half guard for a bit, play about in an open guard, see what happens if you end up in turtle exchanges. Just if you get up against the fence and you're scrambling there, cool. Let's see what that looks like. You might as well go in. If you're going to call for a big name, if you're going to call for a number one contendership type performance based on a Paul Craig, go out there and show us that you could do it everywhere. I think that's really important for Brendan Allen. For Paul Craig, I think you just need to win. You know what I mean? Like, he's already got a name established. He had a name established at light heavyweight. And obviously, if he can go out and he submits Brendan Allen, then that's great. If he goes out and knocks him out, that's great as well. But yeah, I think for Brendan Allen, I really want to see him put it all together. I really, really want to see it.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned maybe possibly inserting both of these gentlemen into a number one contender fight. Do you think that we're that far ahead with both of these guys?
We probably shouldn't be, but I think Paul Craig,
I definitely think so, more so. Sorry for interrupting, with Paul Craig, more so maybe than Brendan Allen, but please continue. Sorry.
I mean, I think skill for skill, I'd say Brendan Allen's more well-rounded than Paul Craig, right? But Paul Craig has a bigger stock, he has a bigger name, and so that's what the UFC care about, right? Middleweight is sort of calling out for these sorts of people. But if we did Paul Craig versus Rob Whittaker, I'm picking Rob Whittaker. If we're doing Brendan Allen, Rob Whittaker, I'm picking Rob Whittaker. If we do Paul Craig, Marvin Vettori, Paul Craig, Jared Cannonier, you best believe I'm picking the B side to that every time, right? Like, I'm not picking Paul Craig in those fights. But if you're Paul Craig, you've got to shoot your shot at the end of the day. And I think if you're Brendan Allen, you've got to shoot your shot as well, Like, I could probably see Brendan Allen beating Marvin Vettori. I could see him losing to Rob Whittaker. I could see him having a decent enough fight with a Jared Cannonier. But again, if you're those guys, if you're 5 deep, 5 wins, 5 finishes in the middleweight division is fucking huge. So sooner rather than later, they're going to throw him in against somebody. And
somebody that they did throw him in there against in 2021 was Chris Curtis. He lost that fight in 2020. Brendan Allen lost to Sean Strickland. Now, I mean, those are not easy fights, but it seems to be fights similar to this, similar to level of Paul Craig, that Brendan Allen kind of seems to kind of crumble under, for lack of a better term, shall we say. So a win here in the main event against Paul Craig would be very, very exciting for Brendan Allen, and would set him up for another big fight, as it would for Paul Craig if we don't get the Scottish show for this fight. If Paul Craig goes out there and gets it done, we really got to be shouting for the rooftops for a Scottish show with Paul Craig. But I hope that wouldn't be to the detriment of an Irish show either. So I think Scotland and Ireland might be fighting over the next fight night event over in that side of the world. But it'd be interesting to see what happens in that main event. Moving on, Harry, to the co-main event, Jake Matthews will take on undefeated Michael Morales in the welterweight division. We've seen Jake Matthews. He's been around for quite some time. Very, very, up and down in his UFC career, picked up a couple of good wins and, picked up also some losses as well. A loss to Sean Brady in 2021. These things happen. Was a little bit surprised to see him drop a fight to Matthew Smelsberger, and then picked up and got a win against Darius Flowers by rear naked choke. But yeah, he's taken on a decent enough prospect right now as well in Morales, a guy that hits like a truck, a guy who's obviously undefeated and picked up recent wins over Max Griffin, which is a good win in my opinion against a guy who was, Max Griffin has been performing well lately and got a nice unanimous decision win over him. Adam Fuget picked up a win by knockout over him, as well as Trevin Giles. But yeah, I think this is a step up in competition for both Jake Matthews and also a step up in competition, I believe, based off their last performance for Michael Morales as well. And you just can't trust Jake Matthews really anymore. You don't know what you're going to get from him, Harry. He's just like, he seems like he has all the capabilities in the world, but just doesn't really click for him sometimes in there. But he's going to have to be really on coming in here against a guy that hits as hard as Michael Morales, because it could be an early night if he doesn't cross his T's and dots his I in this one.
I think I've come to the point where Jake Matthews doesn't have the skills, because if he has the skills, we'd see them with more consistency, right?
But that can be also a mental thing too, though.
Sure, but that's a skill in of itself,
for sure. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
When we look at Volkanovski, when we look at Islam Makhachev, when we look at, if you name a guy sub 8, right, they've all got the mental ability, right? As well as the skills, they've got the hands, they've got everything. They're putting it all together. Yeah, they might have slight deficiencies or slight weaknesses in their game, but none of them have a problem with consistency. None of them. They turn up and you know what you're getting. For better or for worse, you know what you're getting. It is not okay that Jake Matthews has squandered his prospect status by just lacking consistency, because it's not something that's not easy to point out. If we can point it out, you best fucking believe that he and his coaches have seen it too. And so what are we doing, right? Now, it could just be that this is who he is as a human. And if it is, then that's what we accept him to be. And this is a very tough fight in Michael Morales, because if the wrong Jake Matthews turns up, he's got a very, 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 very tough out in Michael Morales. Michael Morales, undefeated, has had to come back from his adversity in his UFC career. And this is perfect matchmaking for Michael Morales too. Because if Jake Matthews is on, it's a tough fight. And if he wins it, it's a big name to get a win over. If it's a poor Jake Matthews that turns up, he just smokes him. He absolutely smokes him. And then he goes on and he's now 16-0 and he fights a real tough prospect in whoever his next fight is. But this is a good litmus test for Jake Matthews to see where he is. Darius Flowers, obviously, very, very late notice opponent, really nowhere near the level of Jake Matthews, even on his worst day. Yeah. And so he got that done however he got it done. But this one for me is UFC wins yet again. If Matthews turns away Morales, he hands his first loss. Morales goes a little bit back in the pecking order, and they could build Jake Matthews based on the win over Morales. If Morales goes out and wins, well, Jake Matthews has a name that people know. He's got some good wins, and they build Michael Morales yet again.
Yeah, I feel like, having watched Michael Morales, where some of his previous fights, he's been knocking guys out quite well. Obviously, going in against an experienced guy like Max Griffin, didn't have it all his own way, but still did enough to get the unanimous decision. He's a guy that can't just rely on the power that he has. He's got to go in there and mix it up. You've talked a lot in the breakdown and a couple of these ones of going out there and showcasing your overall well-rounded ability and not being able to rely on it, because being a one-trick pony ain't going to get you up the rankings here. And Morales has a good chance to come in here and impress against a guy who has a name. Everybody knows Jake Matthews. He's been around for quite some time. So this could set up a couple of exciting fights for Morales. But where do you think that he kind of situates himself in the overall landscape of the division?
No idea is the honest answer right now. I think, he's 24 and he looks every bit of 24. Still looks like, this is a horrible thing to say, but he needs to taste defeat, I think. Because the minute he just feels like he's not really taking the lessons that he needs to take in, and I don't think he's taking them as seriously as he maybe should do. And so a loss is one of those things where you can't hide from it. It's on your record now. It is what it is. You have lost, and that breaks a certain bravado. It breaks a certain level of ego down and allows you to assess things slightly differently. I'm not sure that he loses to Jake Matthews. I think he has more than enough to get it done against Jake Matthews. But if you just check his topology record, the fella he was supposed to fight before Max Griffin was Rinat Fakhretdinov. If they decide to circle back on that fight, that's a fucking scrapperoonie, right?
Yes.
So, I do expect him to beat Jake Matthews. I think he hits very, very, very hard. And I think Jake Matthews is there to be hit. And so we could have a lot of fun when it comes to the breakdown next week when we're talking about who to match Jake Matthews. Who to match Michael Morales with. And frankly, we can have some fun with Jake Matthews too. But yeah, that's my feeling. I mean, I need to see more from Morales.
Yeah. Like, to just kind of circle back on what you were saying about, like, he needs a loss. He's kind of probably approaching it of the opinion, if it isn't broke, why fix it at this stage? But you can't really come in with that approach. I think, as you move up and as you face these better guys, you will kind of get found out when it comes to that. Next up, we're going to mention Jordan Leavitt versus Chase Hooper. Interesting fight. I think a good matchup here. Look, I mean, this isn't going to be the most skillful fight that we see, Harry, to be honest. I mean, you're not going to be coming at me on the breakdown show with your head in your hands as I'm saying this to you, and kind of breaking this down from a technical perspective. But it's a building fight for Chase Hooper against a winnable opponent in Jordan Leavitt, a guy that we've seen in there with a couple of other names as well. And, what are we thinking about this Chase Hooper project, Harry?
It should have been pushed to CFFC or LFA about 3 fights ago. But look, Chase Hooper can grapple, right? Make no mistake, he can grapple. Jordan Leavitt likes to grapple. And so Jordan Leavitt doesn't have massive power in his hands, can strike, right? Can do a bit of striking, but doesn't have huge power in his hands. And so again, Chase Hooper goes out with a match that he could grapple in, right? And Leavitt is not going to try and do his absolute best to deny the grappling. He'll grapple too. And so that allows Hooper to be in his wheelhouse, but also allows him to test some of the striking that he has. We could see some interesting grappling, right? We could see some interesting grappling, and we could be talking about that on the breakdown. But I've not been enamored with Hooper's skill development in the last 2 or 3 fights. And I just don't know, bless you, Barry, but I don't, bless you again, but I don't know what changes drastically. Like, you look at somebody like Lupa Godinez, and we talked about her on the breakdown last week, that's somebody that has fucking absolutely nailed down and been like, okay, I got a problem here. I'm going to fix this grappling. I'm going to fix this striking. I'm letting go of the grappling for a little while, and I'm focusing on just that. I don't see those jumps in improvement from Chase Hooper. So if he's got them, let's see them.
Indeed. And it's like, it is a lot difficult for some other than others with Chase Hooper and Leavitt. But this is an interesting fight to kind of see where we're at. Because I'm kind of the same opinion of you, where it's like, I feel that it's somewhat a little bit unfair at times with Chase Hooper to be kind of have this much of a spotlight shone on him while he's a growing fighter. He's still only 24 years of age. He's got a lot of growing to do. And ultimately, like, you don't want to see him going in there and getting massively hurt. But I think if you are going to match him up, that a guy like Jordan Leavitt, who wouldn't be known as a devastating striker, is probably a good guy to put him in there. Obviously, Leavitt is known for his grappling prowess, but interesting to see. A good win for Chase Hooper against a guy like Nick Fiore. I think it's another winnable fight here against Leavitt. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that as we move on to the next fight, and that's Amanda Ribas. And this one, it is a little bit more interesting. Obviously, Ribas wants to kind of stake her claim up the rankings in the 125-pound division, and she will go in there against Luana Pinheiro. It's an interesting fight, Harry. What do you think of Ribas and Pinheiro and how they match up?
Ribas should win this fight. Ribas should win this fight. Pinheiro goes out and wins a split decision over Michelle Watson-Gomez and doesn't shower herself in a ton of glory in that one. Ribas is nasty, hits hard, hits snappy. She can certainly grapple. Got some lovely arm bars in the UFC, and this is a fight that Luana Pinheiro it should find tough, right? Like going out and beating Randa Marcos is one thing. Winning a gritty decision against Sam Hughes is another thing, but Michelle Watson-Gomez, we know where Michelle Watson-Gomez is right now, and that's not the level of name that it would have been sort of 3 to 5 years ago. And so Ribas, this is a bit of a step up, a step down, in terms of actual competition value. But sure, Luana Pinheiro is still riding a 9-fight win streak, right? So we have to take that seriously. And if I'm Ribas, I'm going out and I'm making a statement here if I can.
You got to nearly go out there and make a statement, Harry, after losing that last fight to Macy Barber as well. It's like going out there and kind of, I think you have to kind of really insert yourself back into that division and into to kind of to produce yourself as a prospect. You need to go out and, after a statement loss, produce a statement win. And I think that's what she's got to do in there against Pinheiro. And it'd be interesting. I like Ribas as a fighter. Have you cooled down on her as a potential woman who might kind of stake her claim as a consistent top 10 fighter or top 5 fighter in the 125-pound division? But she does have some time to kind of work with, doesn't she?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's consistency. It's consistency for Ribas. I certainly think the skills are there. I don't know what happens when it all goes wrong, but it fucking all goes wrong when it all goes wrong. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just I need to see Ribas put a run. Like, you lose to Macy Barber, sure. Macy Barber's a really solid fighter, right? No problem with that whatsoever. Getting a win over Vivia Rougeau is a fantastic win, but then you lose to Caitlin Chookagian and the fight before that. You go out and have a great performance against Verna Jandiroba, who's somebody I'm really high on, and then you get knocked out by Marina Rodriguez. Like, I just need to see that it's more than a 50-50 fighter. That's what I need to see, because in the last couple of runs, it's 50-50. And I need to see you put 2, 3, 4 wins together, and then we can start talking.
And maybe we just need to kind of keep her matched up in these and allow her to kind of develop into that before, because you can't like have her win this fight, then push her again, and then have her possibly losing again. So interesting thing. I think where Ribas really struggles is that there's no real impact on any of her strikes. And I think that is a big problem as you're moving up that division, that you're going to be fighting. Like, you're not going to be able to rely on taking the fight down and dominating in the grappling department. You've got to earn the respect of some of these women. And I'd be interested to see if she can muster that up as well. That fight does take place. Moving on, and we've got to mention, last but not least on this part. Oh, well, let me just break you down the rest of the main card for you. Obviously, Brendan Allen, Paul Craig. Your main event, Matthews Morales, we've covered already. Co-main event, Leavitt Hooper. We've got Peyton Talbot versus Nick Aguirre in the 135-pound division. Should be an interesting contest. Talbot coming in undefeated, Aguirre 7-1. I think, it's I feel it's almost impossible to put on a bad bantamweight fight right now. But we'll see how that one goes. Amanda Ribas versus Luana Pinheiro obviously won't kick off the main card. That, in fact, will go to Uros Medic versus Johnny Parsons in the 170-pound division. We won't spend too much time on any of those fights. To go and look at the prelims, we're only picking out one fight on the prelims today, guys. We're going to look at Mick Parkin versus Xiao Machado. Let's kind of talk a little bit about the rest of the fights on the prelims. Obviously, we've got news today that Cesar Almeida versus Christian Leroy Duncan fight is cancelled as of the recording of this podcast. It's just early in the week for us. Christian Leroy Duncan has not been rematched yet. Don't know if he's going to be rematched, but that's a pity. We were excited to see him getting back in there, and we were definitely going to talk about that. Nicholas Motta will take on Trey Ogden at 155 pounds. I don't really care about that fight, if I'm being completely honest. Lucy Pudilova versus Ailin Perez in women's 135-pound division. Obviously, Pudilova fighting out of SBG. Picked up a loss to Jocelyn Edwards. A little bit of controversy around that one. But yeah, it was a close one. and Pudilova will be looking to kind of come back and get into the win column there. Who else do we have here, Harry? Jonathan Pierce versus Joanderson Brito at 145. That should be all right. Might be a knock that one. Chad Angheller versus Jose Johnson. Angheller representing Canada. Johnson coming in. I don't even recognize her if he has fought in the UFC. Let's check real quick. He lost to Damon Blackshear by a twister in his last fight. You know, he's coming through the Contender Series as well. And who else we have? We have Charles Johnson on the bottom of the card versus Rafael Esteban. We like Charles Johnson a little bit. He's been in some good fights. Lucas Alexander will come in and take on Yeka Saragi in the 145-pound division, which brings us back to your boy Mick Parkin, who will take on Caio Machado. Caio Machado obviously did come up through Battlefield Fight Championships in Canada, picked up a good couple of wins on the Canadian regional scene, got his shot at the Contender Series, was in not a very good fight against Kevin Scaflarzi. That was an absolutely terrible fight, and neither of them should have been signed, if we're being completely honest. And I've spoken to Caio Machado before as well, and you know, a nice guy, kind of cutting his claw in the heavyweight division as I lose one of my earpieces. And look, he gets a contract. He comes in here against Mick Parkin, and he's going to have his work cut out for him here, Harry, isn't he?
Yeah, it's a tough fight. Parkin has really benefited from that room of Aspinall, Phil DeFries, and everyone else that trains there, because when you're training with those boys, one, they're all your size, and two, they're very skilled. So you just going in and swanging and banging, you're going to get hurt, right? Because they're going to punish you. And so I think what we've seen with Parkin, especially in his UFC debut against Jamal Pogues, is really lovely jab. Really lovely jab. Works very well behind the jab. He's patient. He's consistent with it. Hurtful jab. Lands a really nice right hand. He works the body well. And he's got some nice low kicks. And so, okay, he's not going in and just decimating fellas, right? He's not going in and just trucking everyone. But he's a very well put together, solid fighter. And he will have a good career in the UFC, I'm sure. I don't see him knocking on the door of, top 10s or any of this stuff. But I can certainly see him earning a solid living and being a sort of 15 to 13 fighter for the UFC in that heavyweight division. Caio Machado, I'm not sure he's any of those things. He could turn it around 8-1. He's got time on his hands too, so there is that. But I just think Parkin will benefit so much from that room that he is in.
Unreal. And he'll benefit off the fact that Caio Machado eats a lot of shots too. And if you're fighting Mick Parkin, you can't be taking those kind of shots. This could be this could be a very relatively quick blowout for Mick Parkin in this fight here, because I'm very high on him for all the reasons that you just suggested as well. It's like the age-old kind of, everybody says it, but it's the iron sharpens iron mentality, and that's the room that Mick Parkin is in right now. And you can imagine how much he's buzzing after seeing Tom Aspinall go in there and take out Sergey Pavlovich off the couch, basically. Tom Aspinall off the couch, boom. There you go, Sergey Pavlovich. And Mick Parkin's like, I'm in there and I'm hanging with this guy on a daily basis. So that's how you feed into performances like that. And, that wraps us up. What shall we call it? A C- card, I would say, in the Apex. We'll be back for the breakdown show to break down all of these fights, all the big stories coming from that. Curveball at you, Harry. Before we finish up today, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. This weekend is a cracking Bellator show, and I'm curious. The big fight that stands out to me is the fight between Patchy Mix and Sergio Pettis for the 135-pound title. I'm really excited about this. I'm really high on Patchy Mix, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on that fight and how you see it going.
I like Patchy Mix in that fight.
I do too.
I think his length, I think the ability to grapple, his willingness to snatch submissions and use them in order to either get back to his feet or to land damage or to, cement a good position is really good. He hits hard and he's very fast. Now, Sergio Pettis is obviously all of those things too. He's quick, he's powerful, he's very agile. But Yeah, I like that fight a lot, and I like it for Patchy Mix. Again, when we just talked about when you see fighters coming through and coming together, there's sort of a natural evolution to them, and it just feels like everything's coming at the right time for them, and everything just sort of happens in the right moments. And it feels very much to me like that's what we're looking at now with Patchy Mix. I mean, just look at the run he's had. Albert Morales wins that. Okay, you lose to Juan Archuleta. He's a very good fighter. Goes out and chokes James Gallagher after, being relatively dominant in that fight. Let's be honest. Okay, he missed weight, but, these things sometimes happen in MMA. Decision over Kyoji Horiguchi. That's an absolutely huge win. Then goes out and beats Magomed Magomedov, which is an insane win. Guillotines him in round 2. Insane. And then he puts Ruffian Stotts' head into the crowd in 1 minute and 20 seconds. Like, that is just a savage win altogether. And, it feels like the age of 30, we talk about this all the time, 19 fights deep in his career, his athletic prime is coming to a fore, his mental maturation is coming to the fore. Looks like he's in a really settled relationship. Looks like he's got a good team around him. This is your time. You know what I mean? Like, this is your time if you're Patchy Mix. And so I like him in this fight. I like him.
Yeah, I like that fight as well. I like Matt Patchy Mix in it, and not too much more to add on top of that. I just wanted to sprinkle a little bit of Bellator action in at the end of this podcast, a little surprise for everybody. I'll definitely be checking out that card. I mean, arguably that Bellator card is better than the UFC card this weekend. Would you agree?
Sure, look, there's 3 title fights on it, right? How can we say anything different? You know what I mean?
I know. Yeah, that's a pretty harsh question to ask, but yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to watching that. And you should be too if you're tuning in to listen to the UFC. Definitely head over and check out the Bellator card this weekend as well. Lots of top fights on that. Yaroslav Amosov, everybody else on it too. At BJJ_Harry Powell. At O'Neill MMA. Maybe we'll sprinkle a little bit of a Bellator action into the breakdown show as well next week. But we shall see you then. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Take care, and we'll chat to you soon.